So let's understand the grid in Beaver Builder. So a grid, as you may be or may not be aware, is made up of rows, and then inside those rows we have columns. And then inside those columns we have the modules that we drag in using Beaver Builder. So for example, if we just reverse engineer this page, we have one row here with one column of content inside, and inside that column we have two modules. We have this photo module, and then we also have this heading module. Moving on down, here we have a row, so one row with three columns, and inside those columns are three modules, and they look like text editor modules, which if we click, we can confirm they are in fact text editor modules inside these columns. So let's look at adding a row. So what happens is when you add a row, it has to contain columns, otherwise it will not allow you to add it to the page. So what I mean by that is if we add content and then click on row layouts, and we have the one column, when we drag this in, it's going to create a row with one column. So here's our row that's highlighted, and inside there's our column, which again, if we hover on the column, it highlights. And what I'm referring to is if we go ahead and remove this column, and just note this is the only column in the row, so remove, the row is deleted as well. So that's what I mean. You can only add a row if it has columns. And that's why when you click on row layouts, you get the amount of columns that you're going to add into that row when you drag it onto the page. So let's go ahead and we can drag in three columns. So let's just drag it in here. And you can see now we have a row with 1, 2, and 3 columns. Now, let's say we want to remove one of these columns and we only want to have 2. To do that, we click on the hamburger icon over here and we click remove. And now we have 2 columns. And if you want to remove this one here, we could just go ahead and just replicate that action. And now we have one row with 1 column. But what if we want to add columns to this row? To do that, if we go to add content and row layouts, let's just say we drag in 1 column, so we click and drag. So you can see wherever we're about to release, it lights up in blue, and that's where we're going to add our column. So if I added it here above, you can see now it's added a new column on top of the other one. But if we click and drag another column in, and we do it to the right-hand side and release, now we have 2 columns next to each other. And again, just say we want to convert these 2 columns to 4 columns. We will drag in another 2 because 2 plus 2 equals 4. So we drag that in and see over here on the right-hand side, again, we could drag it in on the left-hand side. You can drag it in the middle. So let's just say we release it in the middle. So now we have 4 columns sitting next to each other. Okay, so what if we want to resize these columns? So let's go ahead and resize this one over here. We can just click and drag and you can see the percentages that are showing. Now do note that the percentages that are showing are for the full row. So for example, you can see if I drag it over here, you can see it says 8% on the left column. That means that this column here takes up 8% of the width of the whole row here. So this is 8, this is 42, and then these would be 25. Now, when we drag this, do also note that we're only dragging the container that is adjacent to it. So if we resize this column here, this one over here resizes automatically. If we resize this here, this one resizes automatically. But notice how these two do not change. If we want to change the size of these two, we could click and drag here and notice they only change as well. And we can do it over here. So now we have uneven columns, which we have gone ahead and we've dragged to resize. We can also, if we click the hamburger icon and go to edit column and then column settings, we can also manually enter in the width that we want to take up. So we could write 25, and now this would take up 1/4. And if we repeated that process, we would get equal columns of 25 as I have gone ahead and done here. Now, the next thing that I want to show you is if we did go ahead and change these sizes like that, and then we decided we actually wanted to revert back and quickly make these equal sizes, what you can do is you can go ahead and click the hamburger icon and then edit column and then reset column widths, and that will make it all 25 for each of the 4 columns. And if we went ahead and removed this column over here, so there was 3 columns, and then we resized this one, but wanted to revert them back, again, we could just go in and reset column widths, and now they're taking up 33.3%, which if we just go into the column settings, we can confirm. So that's how you can resize columns. The last thing that I want to show you is if we go ahead and resize these columns so they're uneven, if we go to add content row layouts and we drag a new column onto this row of columns, you will notice that they do in fact reset their column widths automatically, and then you just have to go in and drag and adjust again. Now, if we want to remove this row, we could just obviously go ahead and click remove. And so now that row of columns has been removed from within this row. So now we have one row with 4 columns, which after doing that reset column widths are now 25% each. If we want to duplicate this row, we can just go ahead and click the duplicate row icon, and now we have 2 different rows with 4 columns in each. Now, if we want to reorder the columns, we can literally just click the move icon here, and you can drag it wherever you want. So if I released it underneath, it's now moved that column that was over here on the right to its own row over here. And now these have reset themselves to 33.33. So do note that if you do, say we resized these and then we drag a column out, do know that these do reset their widths, and it's exactly the same as how we drag a column in. When we drag it out, they do in fact reset. And then let's just say we wanted to add this column over here next to this one. We could just click and drag. And now that's gone to one full width column, and these are 2 50% columns. You can also move columns between rows, so I could click on this column and drag it into this new row underneath. I could also get this column over here and drag it outside these 2 rows. And as I mentioned before, a row needs to have a column inside for it to exist. And because we're taking this column out of here and we're dropping it not into a row, Beaver Builder automatically creates a row and wraps it around this column. So see how it's going full width here and it says new row? That means the column that we're moving is going to be inserted into a new row. So if we release, we can see here's our new row with the column that we just dropped. Now the last thing for this tutorial that we need to cover is under the add content, as we've just shown in this lesson, row layouts contains all the columns that we can drag in to build our grid. Now the first thing to note is the max you can add is 6 columns. So if we drag that into its own row, see how we can add 6 columns here. And if we go to add content, row layouts, and we just get 1 column and try and drag it in and we release, you'll see now that it's 7 columns. So you can in fact have more than 6 columns, But the size of these, as they do scale down on mobile devices, I definitely wouldn't recommend having 7 columns next to each other. And that's sort of what the Beaver Builder team have done here. They've limited it to a max amount of 6 columns built in here, because when it does get over 6, everything does get a bit cramped and there's not many use cases for having 7 columns or more next to each other. The last couple of options here are sidebars. So left sidebar, right sidebar, and left and right sidebar. So if we drag a left sidebar into its own row, it creates a row with 2 columns. And these columns, if we just look at the thinner column, this one's 33.33%. And then this one is going to be 66.66%. So that is all these couple of options down here are doing. If you do a left sidebar, it's just adding 2 columns, which one takes up a third, being 33%, and 2/3, so 66%. And if you did the right sidebar, it will just inverse that. So if we do this, still 2 columns, but notice this one's a 33% and this one's a 66%. And then the last one, the left and the right sidebar, the middle column is 50% and the outer ones are 25%. But besides creating a couple of columns at different sizes, these options here can be created by adding these as well. So we could drag in 2 columns, and then we could make this one 33%. And you can see it has the exact same effect as the one up here where we dragged in the right column. So I just wanted to point that out because maybe some people think that these have certain options that they add in terms of adding a sidebar, but it's literally just adding a row with columns at 33% on either the left or right, or columns at 25% if you choose the 2-column left and right sidebar layout. So that's it for this lesson. Let's move on to the next one.